How often do you think about the Oscars? About how many Oscar winning films there are and how many you've seen? Yeah, there's a few famous Oscar winning films that we've all seen, The Godfather and Lord of the Rings and Titanic, I'm King of the World, all that stuff. But the Oscars have been running since 1927. There are currently over 1,000 films, feature length films, which have won an Oscar. How many have you seen? I did the numbers for myself. It's not many, and I consider myself quite a movie buff. So here then is the premise of this podcast. Every episode, I and a rotating cast of two guests will randomly select one of the 1,000 films that have won an Oscar, watch it, and talk about it, with the only requirement being that one of the three people on each episode has to have never seen the movie before we talk about it. That will get difficult with Star Wars. Please note that our coverage of a movie does not constitute an endorsement of it. My least favorite movie of 2016, David Ayer's Suicide Squad, won an Oscar for Best Makeup, while my favorite movie of 2016, The Handmaiden, wasn't even nominated for anything. Please also note that our coverage of a movie is not a blanket endorsement of any or all of the people involved in it. A lot of terrible people have won Oscars. Kevin Spacey won an Oscar 20 years before he was outed as an abuser, and Roman Polanski won one 20 years after. But every film, good, bad, or in many cases mediocre, that has won an Oscar is an important part of film history just for being there. And they all, on some level, deserve a tiny bit of consideration, even if that consideration ends up concluding that it's garbage. And with all of that in mind, I am your host, as always, Ellie McConaughey, and with me today is Connor Duffy
Hello.
and Brian Harris,
Hello as
and
well.
possibly Brian Harris's cats, appropriately enough.
They're not my friends' cats. They are my friends' cats. I'm pet
Close
sitting.
enough, close enough.
Yes.
And today we're talking about the 1974 film Harry and Tonto, which won Best Actor at the 47th Academy Awards for Art Carney, and also was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, was beat by Chinatown, and which stars Art Carney and a cat that looked so much like Jonesy from Alien that I genuinely spent a few minutes digging around on IMDb to see if it was the same cat.
Maybe that's how that cat got the role in Aliens. Maybe they're related, you know? Nepotism is rife in Hollywood.
And hold on. No, I can't find a joke. I can't find a way to cleanly combine meowpotism. No,
No. Nepiautism?
that's better. That's pretty good.
Nepiautism.
There we go.
No, here we go.
I hate to interrupt.
Oh my god, it actually looks a lot like Tonto. Hello, kitty.
We have Tonto here.
Ideal.
Nepotism.
Nepotism. There it is.
Nepotism. Got it. We did it. All right, everyone, let's go home.
Yeah, I don't need any more of the episodes. No. This is a 1974. I mean, I don't want to call it it calls itself a comedy. Like it is occasionally funny, but I don't know.
It's a comedy drama.
Yeah, a dramedy. Yeah.
It's not as dramatic, as especially some of the other films that were nominated this year, like The Godfather Part 2 and Chinatown. Yeah.
I said this in the Discord. This was a fucking stacked year at the Oscars. Like Godfather Part 2, Chinatown, Conversation, Day for Night, Women Under the Influence. Ellen Burstyn, who is in this movie at playing Harry's daughter, also won for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore this year. It's a great film.
Yeah, a wild year.
Two Francis Ford Coppola and two Mel Brooks movies got nominated that year.
Also, Albert Finney for Murder on the Orient Express.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Murder on the Orient Express came out, and then you had like the big disaster movies, like the famous Towering Inferno. So it was a year for blockbuster stuff as well as just fantastic modern classics. I think is the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm. With regards to Towering Inferno, are we still doing Rest in Piss, or have we moved on to the straight Burn in Hell OJ?
I feel like we have to pick one or the other because they would cancel each other out.
Oh, that's true. I like Rest in Piss.
Mm-hmm.
It's it feels very juvenile, but like in a good way.
Yeah.
Amusingly, since I was mentioning the cast, amusingly, one of the woman who like shows up the last like 45 seconds of the movie is Lenny Bruce's wife, not wife, mother, Lenny Bruce's mother, and a biography of Lenny Bruce was one of the movies this beat
Mm-hmm.
at the 47th Oscars,
a,
starring
a pretty
Dustin
good
Hoffman.
a good movie.
I haven't seen
Uh,
that one.
Me
a
neither.
a very solid movie. A very perhaps unsurprisingly, a very good central performance by Dustin Hoffman.
He's very good.
Yeah, he's known to be pretty good from time to time. I've heard.
Yeah, it's interesting that like you have. I feel like one of the things that's interesting. I will say we are all, I believe, fulfilling the requirement that at least one of us hasn't seen this movie before. I'd never even heard of this movie before.
Same here.
I'd never even heard of it. The first time I watched it was the night before we are recording this show,
Hmm.
and in fact, because I wasn't, I'm not from America originally, so I had absolutely no concept of who Art Carney was,
Oh wow.
other than his name. Yeah, I think the most famous thing that he's ever been in. Looking very quickly at his IMDb page, like the only thing that I probably know him from is Last Action Hero.
Oh, not even the Muppet. Which Muppet movie was he in?
Okay, yeah, he was in Muppets Take Manhattan, but I was not. I've never seen that one.
Oh wow,
So
that's a good one.
Me neither. I, in fact, I think the only thing I've ever seen Art Carney in is clips from the Star Wars Holiday Special.
I have seen the Star Wars Holiday Special. I watched some of Honeymooners in like film school.
mm,
It's aged about as well as a 50s comedy, sitcom comedy you could expect it to. Like, a little bit gross, but it's the 50s.
yeah, there were a few lines, a few jokes in Harry and Tonto that kind of show their age as well. But
That's what was interesting. I was like reading, I rolled this movie up, and I don't remember what other things I rolled, but this one seemed the most interesting to me because it was. I wanted. We'll get to it at the end of the episode, but I wanted to have like a solid spread across the years for our first handful of episodes. Someone suggested I should be going in like historical order. I'm like, I'm not doing that. It's too much silent films at once. But I looked at the like from the plot outline. I really expected Harry to be a lot more, how do I put this, like curmudgeonly,
mm,
like angrier, nastier, have more negative relationships. He is actually just a very sweet, very just like kind of like an easygoing kind of old dude, which is nice. I don't I feel like you see curmudgeons more in movies like this.
I did get the Straight Story vibes,
Mm,
although I haven't seen that movie either. I just sort of know kind of what it's about.
that's an extremely good movie.
yeah,
That is better than this one, but it's David Lynch.
I do agree. Like, yeah, when you begin the film, when reading like the synopsis and that, yeah, like you're waiting for him to kind of like go on this journey of being like some old curmudgeonly fellow and then maybe mellow out by the end. But yeah, like you say, like he's erudite. He has, I think, certain attitudes about the world that now that he's in his 70s, he's kind of stuck on.
Hmm.
And so he doesn't really change his views, but he feels kind of accepting, even when in the first act of the film, before he hits the road, you get this sense of like this tension in the house when he has to move in with like his son and his son's family, and his being there kind of puts an added emotional weight or mental weight on everyone. Like he has these occasional little flare-ups with like his daughter-in-law,
Hmm.
but it never feels like, for me anyway, like watching it, it didn't feel like either of them were necessarily the quote unquote bad guy in the scenario. It's just a case of a dude who lived, a guy who got forcibly evicted from his home and who kind of appreciated his perhaps independence, is now kind of surrounded by his family, half of whom don't mind if he's there, but would rather not have the added
person.
the added person taking up the room. You can tell it's kind of like it's a smaller house, even if it's in the suburbs. And you do get the sense that, like, it feels very real in that sense, in that no one is particularly happy with the situation, but they're not. There's never this idea of like telling Harry to maybe be in his best efforts to move into a home, an
Mhm.
old folks home, or find his own place. Harry kind of has the sense already that he kind of needs to leave to take some of that emotional burden off of his family. But he wouldn't call it emotional burden because it was 1974.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. The base one thing I wasn't really expecting from, again, like the snapshot from, I'm famously opposed to getting a feel for a movie from Wikipedia pages. I feel like they remove a lot of the stuff that you can't put down in words about a movie.
Hmm.
But like one thing I wasn't like really thinking about is how much of an interesting little snapshot of what the country was feeling like in '74 this movie was. Like there's this joke very early on, I put it in my notes. Who's vice president this week? Who cares? That's such like a weird, and like the urban decay in New York City, which has become the visual shorthand for the '70s, but isn't it clearly isn't affected in this movie. It's just like the way shit was in '74.
Hmm.
It's just like I think that a lot of that, what you just said about how there's no like flare up, it's a very very understated movie. I don't think it ever really says any of the stuff that I was sort of like getting from it out loud. Like there's this one scene pretty early on in the film. It's before he leaves New York where he like has to go identify his friend's body.
Mm.
That
Yes.
which is a really good. Art Carney is doing some very good work in that scene. But what sort of like hit me about it when I was watching it is he doesn't seem sad for most of the scene, and it sort of like hits you like, oh my god, he is so used to burying his friends at this point that this barely even like this. He is good at hiding it, and that's the sort of the vibe. Like it doesn't tell you that; it just sort of expects you to pick up on it, and that's sort of the vibe the whole movie has.
Yeah, it's a really they don't make movies like this anymore. I wanted to comment on a few things you said. One being the whole vice president thing was like it was a reference to
Yeah,
what was
Agnew.
going on at the time because Agnew and then Ford was vice president for like a year, and then it was handed over to Rockefeller. I don't know the whole history of how that all went down.
I do. It's a whole podcast episode on its own. It's a whole podcast series on its own.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when the whole family is all at that little table, it feels very cramped,
Hmm.
and especially in that dinner scene with Leroy,
Mm.
you really start to feel the tension building that in that house, and that feeling that yeah, Harry needs to leave and find his own place or go somewhere else. And you were saying earlier that like, oh, you were expecting him to be like curmudgeonly, and then he mellows out.
Hmm.
But I think this is thinking about it now. I think it's more of it's a flat arc. Harry has a flat arc where he doesn't change much, but he changes everyone around him.
Mm.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of movies like that that do that. That protagonist is more of a vessel for everyone else, and the whole movie, I mean, he goes one place, he talks to some people, and then you never see them again. He goes to another place, he talks to them, you never see them.
Hmm.
It's just it's a series of
Mm.
vignettes, really, and you just sort of meet fun new characters, and then they're gone. And I will say, I don't, because of that sort of like series of vignettes that this movie has, I don't really, and with of course with Harry's flat arc, I don't really see like what the point of the movie was. Like, what's the theme? What am I supposed to be getting out of it? And apparently Paul Mazursky had been trying to shop this script around for years before he made it, and I'm just trying to get like what was so special about this movie that like, oh, it had to be made.
I
So
get. I get the sense of it, like, there are, broadly speaking, I guess you could say there are two types of story, which is like your plot based story and your character based story. And this is very, very character based, in which we kind of just watch someone experiencing the world as it is, and we spend a lot of time in their head, which is, honestly, obviously less easy to do in a visual medium like film. It is to Art Carney's credit that he, like, is able to kind of fill that role of someone nearing, feeling like he's at the end of his life, and is kind of moving through the world as it is, and reflecting on what that means to him personally. I guess you do have a point that, like, there's about, why does this movie exist, but then at the same time, I think, given the period in which it was made, where you had like a lot of younger directors making very exciting and forward thinking films, like Paul Mazursky. Looking real quick here, he was born in 1930, so he was in his mid 40s when he made this film. And you wonder if maybe for him it was a case of, he felt like in his, he was not as old as Harry, but he 19 born in 1930, which means, he had had some experience of living in the Depression. He'd experienced World War II, the Korean War. He had seen Vietnam, and all the way through that, he's watching like that 40-year period between the start of the Great Depression and, like, the post 1960s flower power into the 70s me generation period. Like, he'd seen his country go through a lot, I guess you could say.
That was what was interesting because I have some notes on this. One of the thoughts that I had watching you mentioned the flower power versus like the new generation. And the first note I have about that is like, if you look at his two grandkids,
Mm,
they are like representatives of those two different generations. There's the one who's like gurus and drugs and, he takes a vow of silence for the first like third of the film. And then there's the one who's like, no, you gotta wake up, you gotta be cynical, you gotta be moving. And once that clicked into place, I sort of realized like everyone he meets is kind of a representative of a different era of
mm,
America being sort of like slamming into the 70s, if that makes sense. What's an example? Like he meets this Native American guy when he's in prison very, very
mm,
briefly. And one of the bits that they do with the scene is they keep going back and forth between him talking like, if I'm being frank, like a generic 70s Native American
mm.
guy in a movie. And like, man, I really want that blender. My wife wants that. Like,
Yeah.
and it's sort of like this mix of that. That would be my guess at the theme. I only saw it myself the first time 2 days ago, so I'm not like ready to write a thesis paper on it or anything.
That the great Chief Dan George, who was always great at presenting that sort of cliche
Mm-hmm.
almost idea of what a Native American is on screen, and then skewering that image as well, really
He's
well.
very good
Yeah.
in Little Big Man. Yeah,
He was nominated for an Oscar a couple years
a
later.
couple years earlier in Little Big
Mm,
Man. Yeah.
a little, yeah, earlier.
He's very good. He's a very good actor. I think he was cast with
Mm.
purpose. I am very glad to see that he is a Native American being played by an actual Native American. That
Hmm.
was not always the case.
And I'm sure he was glad to have a role where he wasn't in a western,
Mm-hmm.
playing the bad guy.
I will say, like, a lot of, like, the casting from top to bottom is actually really solid, really strong. I mean, you've got Art Carney,
It,
and he
yep.
he does a great job. But then, like, even like the smaller roles, like, I guess the woman playing the taxi driver was an actual taxi driver, and
Mm-hmm.
Geraldine Fitzgerald, who plays like his old love Jesse,
Mm-hmm.
in that really, really great scene, a really great moment where he meets her, and she's kind of, essentially, kind of, she's suffering from dementia, so her memories are mixed up, and like, it like, everyone, like, obviously you have the likes of, Ellen Burstyn, and you've got like, is it Philip Bruns as his son Bert.
Mhm.
Like
Was only 13 years younger than Art Carney.
man, hard
Mhm.
13 years though. But yeah,
Well, remember Art Carney, he thought he
Mm.
wasn't old enough to play Harry. That's why he turned it down, but then his agent was like, "Do it."
Yeah,
Yeah.
they put him in some. I'm not like gonna say I'm an expert on what Art Carney looks like, but he does look like they put him in some pretty
Mm.
solid makeup there. We're
Yeah.
still a few years. I think we're like 6 or 7 years out at this point. At the point this movie came out from the best makeup Oscar
Mm.
existing, so
Hmm.
nothing there.
He did remind me a little bit of Johnny Knoxville in Bad Grandpa.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's the reference.
Yeah, really.
The
Who thought we'd be referencing Jackass?
I haven't watched Bad Grandpa. I wasn't actually into Jackass
Oh.
when it was on TV. Oh, the scene with Jesse actually made me like that. Also made me think that like we're doing different eras of American history because he references like very briefly and when he's talking with Ginger. Ginger
Mm.
is for the audience is like a teenager who he starts hanging out with, who like hitchhiking with him,
The teenage runaway who's going to the
going to
commune.
a commune in Colorado.
Hmm.
That Jesse, his ex girlfriend, used to dance with Isadora Duncan, and then like went to Paris. And Isadora Duncan is an interesting pull for me because she was. I think. Forgive me if I'm like imposing my own memories on this. Doesn't Ginger make like a reference to the Vanessa Redgrave movie about Isadora Duncan?
She does,
Hmm.
yes.
Yep.
That pull is interesting to me. I don't know how much of this is intentional, how much of this is me like imposing my own knowledge on the film. But that movie, I never really liked that movie because it's kind of like flattening out a lot, like a lot of biographies, kind of flattening out this very daring, this very controversial woman. She was openly bisexual. She slept with a ton of very famous men and women, and they sort of like ironed that out. And so like I feel like at that point Jesse kind of becomes again I am kind of like I feel like I'm trying to force the movie into making sense via this framework I'm applying to it, but in that framework Jesse sort of becomes like this representative of like the 20s more like free crazy lifestyle that kind of like swept under the rug during the depression and with the rise of like the Bible thumping stuff in the 50s and 60s. That's my impression. Which isn't what that scene is about at all. That scene is very good and very, very sad and a very, like much of the movie, in a very kind of like quiet, understated sort of way.
Yeah, if I can just say real quick here, like, so obviously the reason that this film was chosen for your show is because it is an Oscar winner. Art Carney
Mm-hmm.
won Best Actor in a leading role up against Al Pacino in Godfather Part Two, Dustin
Mm-hmm.
Hoffman in Lenny, Albert Finney for Murder on the Orient Express, and Jack Nicholson for Chinatown. So like a really stacked lineup there, and obviously like in the case of Godfather and Chinatown, those two films at the very least are held up on these pedestals now of American cinema. Uh, you know, rightly or wrongly. I don't know if anyone here thinks that those movies are overrated, but
Oh no, I watched Godfather Part 2 I think last
mm,
year, and Chinatown a few years ago. I took actually
yeah.
watch it for a film history
Mm-hmm.
class for the first time. Chinatown, I think of the two, I think I like Chinatown
Mm,
more, just because that it's a very very intense movie.
It is.
mm.
And Godfather Part 2 is in its own right.
What I was thinking though, like obviously the reason I bring that up is, like I said, I did not know too much about Art Carney before before watching this movie or and starting to look into it. So I wasn't very familiar with his work. Finding out that like he was most famous for like The Honeymooners and a lot of other comic work, I was kind of a little bit surprised, and I would because sometimes you get an Oscar winner, and you kind of get the sense that they get the Oscar because the Academy feels they are quote unquote owed it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but Art Carney, it that in that stacked Oscar year, kind of a surprise. But then I watched the movie, and you get moments like when he goes to identify his friend's body, or the scene with Jesse in the home, and they dance together. And I remember watching, like, you would get these moments through the film
Mm-hmm.
where Carney like just will do these little things with his face, with his expression, with his body language. and I was watching it last night, and I would have those moments there, and I'd go, "Oh, okay, I get it now. I get why he won. Like this is actually like a really great performance."
It is a really great performance, and like the question of whether or not Chinatown and The Godfather Part Two are overrated is so difficult because like, are they great films? Yes. Are they overrated? Well, how could they not be given how highly they're rated? Like
Mm,
at that point, even like Seven Samurai becomes kind of overrated, and that's sort of like one of the like I don't recall what else I rolled for this episode. I think one of the options was like the Ten Commandments,
mm,
and I was just like sitting there, like I part of why I had the rule in place to to make sure that one person has never this is their first time, at least one person this is their first time through the movie, is that I do feel like a lot of movies kind of like get kind of quietly forgotten. Like this movie, we were in the chat, planning this. It's not on streaming anywhere.
mm.
Like I was expecting to be able to at least like rent it on Amazon. Nope. You can get a bootleg on. I'm not gonna say because I don't want MGM going to find it. Or you can buy an out of print DVD, and that's kind of sad because I was genuinely surprised by how much I was moved by this movie at points,
Mm.
and it's just kind of a bummer that drifted out.
I think part of it is that it's a Fox film,
Oof.
and if there's one thing I can criticize Disney, or at least Disney, what they're doing right now is they're not putting their old Fox film library on streaming, not on Hulu, not on Disney Plus. I mean, they have a few like select Fox films on Disney
Mm.
Plus, but there's a whole history of beloved classic Fox films that are just either just kind of not, or they're just sort of on other streaming services like on Max or Paramount Plus. But I really think that Disney needs to do something with its old Fox film catalog, because there's just so many classics on
Mm.
there.
Mean, you say that they're definitely going to come out with a new streaming platform for old Fox movies that you have to pay for separately from Disney
You
Plus.
know what? Fuck it. At least it'll be available. At least, you know what? Do that. Start Fox Plus. I don't care. You know. Yeah. No. I just. There's just. I mean, All About Eve. How Green Was My Valley. I mean, just all of these classic Fox movies that are hard to find.
Mm.
Hmm. It is one of the reasons why I'm such a proponent of like the merger of Fox and Disney is actually a really good example of why I'm such a proponent of physical media. 'Cause there's a very famous episode of The Simpsons, season three episode Start Raving Dad, which features a cameo by Michael Jackson, and it's whatever you think of Michael Jackson, not going into it,
Mm.
it is a very funny episode. And it's not like Michael's going to be making money off it anymore. He died like a decade ago. Oh God, like 15 years ago. I'm so old. Anyway, but if you want to watch that episode legally, you better have the out of print DVDs because it's not on Disney Plus. They pulled it from circulation. It's just gone. Like, and you know, that's weird, right? It's weird that this one company who didn't even make this episode is just like, nah, you can't have it anymore.
I think it was the Simpsons creators who. I think it was after the Leaving Neverland
Yeah,
documentary or series. I think it was after that that Matt Groening or the people involved at Simpsons were like, "Oh my God, Michael Jackson, he's terrible. We need to get rid of this episode. We need to scrub it clean. We never worked with Michael Jackson,
we
even though wasn't it like a like he wasn't even officially credited on that
he was not.
episode
He wanted to go uncredited.
for yeah."
Even beyond that, like we're not. People get pissy about this subject. I know what I think about that. We're not going into it. But like right this year, the 47th Academy Awards, what won for what beat Harry and Tonto of the best original screenplay? Chinatown. Who wants to tell me who directed Chinatown?
Yeah.
There you go. But I don't think we gain anything by like there's this like adage that we have, and we are so off topic on Harry and Tonto, but I'm going to say it anyway.
You can cut this out later if you want to.
No. It's an interesting subject, and that's the whole point of podcasts. Like the conversation goes where it goes. There's this like thing that happens whenever a famous person gets out of his news. I saw it happening a lot when Joss Whedon and all that shit with Joss Whedon went down. Well, I never liked their work anyway.
Mm.
And I'm just sitting there going like,
Mm.
man, what do we gain from pretending that like the art of awful people can never meant anything to anyone? What is that? Just because that makes us feel like, oh well, if I still like his art, he must not really be an abuser. You know, Roman Polanski's a monster. The Pianist is still an amazing movie. It's never that simple.
Sometimes great art is made by terrible people, and
Precisely.
And unfortunately, that's always going to be the case. Like 40 years from now, we'll probably learn some terrible thing about some great artist, and we'll have to, and people will still be having this conversation. Like for example, Manchester by the Sea is one of the best, most heartbreaking films I've ever seen, and Casey Affleck is amazing in it. He captures a sense of loss and grief and self-loathing and just overwhelming depression in such a in such a way that feels so true.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also he's also a bad person, you know. And
There it is.
I guess it's a question of like, can you separate the art from the artist? Can you accept that loving something that was made by someone who you later found out is a terrible person? Can you accept that this person was not, this person at the time they made this great thing was not a good person, but that doesn't need to reflect on you as an individual. Like if I enjoyed movies that were produced by Harvey Weinstein, that doesn't mean that I tacitly endorse or forgive the terrible things that he did, you know?
Yep, absolutely.
So anyway, Art Carney though, never heard anything bad about him.
Thankfully, no one on this movie has gotten canceled yet. Although I've heard some rumors floating around Hollywood that Tonto would. I don't even know how I was going to finish that.
So I was gonna say, like, I don't know. Phil Bruns got one episode in on Seinfeld, and then they recast him. Something must have happened.
Who?
The one who plays his oldest son played Jerry Seinfeld's dad for exactly one episode of Seinfeld, and then they recast him with the actual reason being like, man, we want someone who's a little like angrier.
I don't know. Larry Hagman did get shot in the 80s. It was a really big deal.
It's true.
Yeah. I did want to actually respond to a couple things, which was regarding physical media. This movie, Harry and Tonto, I was looking for the Blu-ray just to see if it existed, and it only exists, the Blu-ray of Harry and Tonto, it only exists in Japan. Apparently, this was a big hit over there.
How bizarre.
Yeah. So if you want to get the Harry and Tonto Blu-ray, you have to order it from Japan, literally.
I think I have to officially just like give up on trying to figure out what Western media is gonna get big in Japan because they what am I gonna do with like the fact that like three of the biggest Western pieces of Western media that are biggest in Japan are like this, Scatman John, and Twin Peaks. What do I do with that?
What is the connection?
I'm gonna end up with a fucking conspiracy board. That's fascinating.
There's your next podcast, Ellie.
Big in Japan?
Yeah, drawing the connections between all of these things and what is it about them that appeals to a wide audience in Japan.
So this guy was an extra in West Side Story, which starred this guy from Twin Peaks. No, I will go insane.
Like the only thing I could think of is like, I guess Japan likes cats. I mean, they have that like cat island, you know?
They do like cats. Two of my favorite Japanese authors, Junji Ito and Haruki Murakami, have both they both do really weird, really surreal work. Junji Ito is a horror mangaka. Haruki Murakami writes like magical realism novels. And they both just did pieces of work about their cats.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. That's enough.
Okay, that's what can
Yeah.
on the subject of cats, which is appropriate because this is for Harry and Tonto. Okay, so obviously we know Art Carney was he won the Best Actor Oscar, but did you know that like
Mhm.
both of our leads are actually award winners?
Yes,
Yeah, Tonto the cat won the Patsy Award for Best Animal Performer in a Motion Picture.
I I up until watching this, up until I saw that on this movie's Wikipedia page, I didn't even know that was a thing. Um,
I am looking into this now. Wow.
and apparently I looking at Wikipedia, it stopped like basically after this movie, which is a shame because
Oh,
that dog from The Thing deserved some sort of award for that performance.
wow. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. The very last ever winner was Roscoe the Mule in the Apple Dumpling Gang.
I mean, I think that the dog from Benji was
Mm.
snubbed, but you know.
The cat is interesting. I made this connection when I was watching. I sort of like posted about it in the Discord that the thing this movie started to remind me of very early on is Up, to the point where if I was kind of like debating digging through behind the scenes features on Up to see if I could see someone make a reference to it,
Mm.
because like the inciting incident that caused him to move out of his apartment and then sort of like his cross country travel is that the city wants to tear down his apartment building, and he's like, no, fuck off. And there's that very kind of bleak but very, I feel like, I don't want to say it's like literally true so much as it's like emotionally true scene of him, of like these two cops just carrying him out of the apartment building still in his armchair. I don't know, that sort of put me in mind of Up. I don't know if I can really like quantify that. I mean, he goes on a journey with a companion, with a younger kid companion and a dog. Like it's not, and an animal. It's not like not there. But I feel like I was stretching a little bit.
You could probably make a case that it might have had some influence, if not directly, then perhaps emotionally. Like there are certainly some of the same emotional beats. There's that
Hmm.
I'm thinking of the scene where Harry is talking to Ginger in no he hasn't picked up Ginger yet, has he? He's talking to Tonto, but he has this he gives this little monologue where he talks about how he and his wife had always planned to drive cross country, and
Hmm.
they just never got around to it. There never seemed to be enough time or enough money, but ultimately they had a good life together. And so and yeah, like you mentioned that, I remember the other day you brought up the comment, and so I was kind of watching the film with that idea in mind, and you can see some of those same kind of emotional beats where you have this elderly man who's being forced out of his home, and who finally makes the journey that he had always planned to do with his wife, who has sadly passed away. And
Hmm.
like I guess in Up, it takes the whole kind of journey for him, the whole film for him to realize that even though they never went on the big adventures that they had planned, their life together was an adventure. When we meet Harry, he kind of already feels that way, that even though he and his wife, I think her name is Annie.
Yeah, he references her a few times. Yeah.
Yeah, even though they never did all of the things that they were planning to do, because he got a safer job. They started a family. They raised their kids, and so they gained all of these responsibilities. He doesn't feel like he missed out on anything with her. He feels like there was he already has the kind of satisfaction of knowing that he lived a life he could be satisfied with. And so he doesn't feel any there. You don't get the sense that there are a lot of regrets about the life he had.
Yeah, yeah, that was sort of what I was kind of like thinking. I think the scene that made me think of it the most is the scene where he's talking to Tonto in the car. And I also have in my notes here that like the mechanic of him to sort of like talking to Tonto is very good because it allows him to have like what amounts to an inner monologue without it feeling cheap.
Mm.
I feel like those often feel very cheap. That's one of those things that like you mentioned, or one of you two mentioned. I'm sorry if I'm conflating your thoughts. Like the sort of like it's a series of vignettes He's just traveling across the country, affecting the people he meets, and that's sort of like the main difference between it and Up. Up is a very clear beginning to end adventure story for kids. This is a quiet dramedy for adults. Though I did one of the thoughts that I had, I'm sort of jumping topics here because I wanted to talk about it before I forget, is like, so I did mention that I felt like each of the characters he meets are representatives of different areas of America, but like each of his three kids are also kind of like different reactions to like the post 50s, 60s, 70s era. Like his youngest kid is like a like go 70s get real estate agent who is actually completely miserable and broke.
Mm.
His middle daughter is like smart but also very lonely. Clearly, his eldest son like moved out to the suburbs, had a wife and two kids, and I don't know. He doesn't seem super jazzed about it, but nothing to do. I don't know. Like I don't know if I'd say that there's a coherent theme there, but I think there's enough to chew on.
I think you do make a good point that it is kind of this movie about looking back at one's own life,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, like you said earlier, the rapid changes that happened, especially post World War II,
Yep.
with the feminists movement and you know
Civil rights, gay rights,
the
hippies.
yeah, the younger generation. Yeah, civil rights. I did like that one scene where he's looking for Jesse and he goes to the house of like a black family and I don't know, it was just funny because he's like, oh well, I used to be lovers with Jesse, and he's like, well, it was a long time ago. I don't know, it was just kind of a little funny moment.
Mm-hmm.
um
I was thinking about that scene actually. Sorry, Brian. Sorry to interrupt, but it,
no, go ahead, go ahead, go
I
ahead.
was thinking about that scene. It's a very nice scene. It's very I don't want to say cute. Cute seems like the wrong word. It's a lovely moment he has with them, with that family, and then making the other Jesse, who then tells him where he needs to go. But I mentioned this to my wife last night as we were watching the movie, how if you were to make this film today, that scene would be cut entirely. Like they would just go from Ginger suggesting, "Let's go find Jesse. Let's go find your first love and see how she's doing," and then there would be kind of maybe some like cutaways to let them making this journey, and then we would cut directly to Jesse at the old people's home. It was interesting that they included that moment, and I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on maybe what why it was there, or maybe what you think it was maybe saying about the characters, or if it was another chance to kind of reflect on this theme of changing America, all these generations of American history kind of smashing into each other at once.
Well, if this movie were made today, I think Harry would be a superhero, and Tonto would be voiced by Ryan Reynolds.
Don't you put that out into the world. Don't you give them ideas.
6 months from
Disney
now,
owns this. They'll remake it.
if I open a Variety webpage and I see 6 months from now, I'm blaming you, man.
Harry and Tonto remake, yeah.
Well, I think an understated, I don't know the specific laws in Indiana, but sort of like an understated element of the punchline where he's like, we used to be lovers, and then the woman who has the same name as his ex-lover comes home, and she's an older black woman. The sort of understated punchline to that scene, I think, and maybe I'm reading too much into it again. I have a tendency to do that, but so like the understated punchline to that scene is, no, you weren't. That was illegal when you were younger. They were less than a decade at this point out from Loving versus Virginia, I think, which is the Supreme Court case that decided that laws against interracial marriage were unconstitutional. It might even, I don't know the exact date, and I'm not going to go looking right now. What that scene is, so that's sort of like the punchline to the scene, I think. I don't know. Is it uncharitable of me to say that, like, in movies, I mean, to this day, but especially pre-70s, whenever you see, like, in the 70s, especially whenever you see, like, the main character about to interact with a non-white character, you're sort of like sucking air through your teeth. Like, oh, is this gonna be bad? Am I gonna be really uncomfortable during this scene? I know that one of the other co-hosts from my last episode, I sort of said the name of the movie, and I got that like moment, and I was like, no, Tonto's the name of a cat.
Yeah, no, I mean, as far as the point of the scene, I think it's just one of those. This movie is just kind of like I said earlier. It's just a series of vignettes, what however you pronounce it.
No, you pronounce. I think you were probably the more classically correct pronunciation.
Maybe.
What we actually need to do is we need to get Connor to say it and have a completely different third pronunciation so that we can just be completely
Perfect.
confused.
Vignettes.
There we go.
Just a
Perfect.
series
That's
of
how you
yeah, it's a
pronounce it.
series of vignettes in an episodic style.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
That way everyone can be mad at us.
You know, something that we sort of touched on, but not as directly, is just kind of how Harry is a character who kind of goes with the flow,
Mm-hmm.
and I think because of that, he's a lot more open to change and the growing diversity of his neighborhood and his country.
Yep.
You know, he's saying buenos dias to, you know, his Puerto Rican and Latino neighbors, and when he gets mugged, and I think it was Leroy who asked, like, was it a white guy or a black guy, and he's like, what does it matter, you know? I think the scene with the wrong Jesse is just kind of there to, like you said, have that understated punchline of like, hey, clearly it wasn't this Jesse, because that would have been illegal 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you know, this movie, you know, you have scenes that you don't really need necessarily from a plot standpoint, but you just kind of throw in for character because there's a joke there.
I
So,
I do
yeah.
think like you can look at the Wikipedia end page for this plot, and it's very very bare bones. You know, he goes to X place and meets X person. Like let me see if I can find it. During his episodic journey, he befriends a Bible quoting hitchhiker, an underage runaway Ginger, with whom he visits an old sweetheart in a retirement home she only half remembers him. And that's like a 5 minute scene that sort of gets at this very understated sadness where he very quickly realizes like she has no idea who I am, but it would be cruel to keep trying to force her to instead of just letting her enjoy this moment with someone she. And that's one of the things that I think the movie has as one of its strengths. It never draws attention to its saddest moments in a way that would make them like maudlin, if that makes sense.
It never feels Oscar baity, like, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. There are a lot of scenes that, in less gentle hands, could have been quite maudlin or perhaps a little cringeworthy, but in this film, I feel like Carney does a very good job of knowing when to be understated, knowing when like a crack in the voice or just a smile that doesn't go all the way up to the eyes does
Mm-hmm.
exactly what he needs to is all he needs to do to get the point across.
and and part of that might just be the era. There's this like I don't remember which music. I watch a bunch of music critics on YouTube because I don't understand music very well and I want to. And one of them said something that kind of like stuck with me a while, which is that like this music that I'm criticizing right now from the 70s sounds more authentic to modern ears because the mechanics of the 70s, the styles of the 70s meant that they had to be all real instruments. You had to have actual brass horns. You had to have an actual guitar. And part of me wonders if like this was the 70s, like very quiet, understated, very kind of grim, or even just like moodier movies were very much the time. If I'm correct, let me look if I'm right. The previous year's Best Picture winner, nope, that was The Sting. Okay, 3 years earlier, I believe it was. Yep, was there's the French Connection, is what I was thinking of, and I think Midnight Cowboy was a couple years before that. In '70 was it? You know, very very understated. Yep, Midnight Cowboy was 1970. So it was just very very understated era of acting and movies in general. But I think I think that I like to think that my taste is still refined enough that I can tell, even in that context, when a movie is being more or less authentic, and it does feel very authentic. It does feel like a very authentic movie.
Yeah. I was going to say earlier during the argument scene, the first one with Harry's, his son's family,
Mm-hmm.
and then the one later with when Leroy is there. I think they both feel very authentic to it felt very realistic. And I think realism was a, growing movement in cinema of the 70s. And yeah, this movie isn't as flashy or it doesn't feel as epic as movies like Chinatown and The Godfather Part 2, which is kind of amazing that it was able to kind of compete with them.
I agree. Like, there are no moments in this film that kind of become. I don't know if you want to say. I don't know if it's right to call them like touchstones. They they become these very memorable, almost legendary moments that then get referenced in other films or get referenced as comedy or what have you. There's none of that in Harry and Tonto. Instead, you just have like a very you just have a an actor and really a whole cast that really understands who they are playing and who are supported by a script that is, I think, open enough that they can, they can really make those roles their own. They're not being directed basically off the script. Maybe it helps that Paul Mazursky both wrote and directed it, so he knew he knew what he wanted, I guess.
Yeah.
But he wrote a screenplay that allowed his cast enough meat that they could really sink their teeth into it, but did not dictate to them who they were. And I think if I'm making any sense here, I think that's what
Or
makes the overall performances from Art Carney and everyone else, including Tonto, who, as was pointed out to me, like cats hate change. So taking this cat on a trans-American road, a road trip using, via bus and car, etc., in like 20 different locations in the space of like a month. That cat must have been like that cat went through it.
mhm.
Poor cat.
but, but there's a great just solidness all the way through from the entire cast.
Mhm.
And I know you had mentioned, you had talked about how like at that point, at that period in 70s filmmaking, understated drama, understated performances were kind of the thing. They were in vogue. They were what was being rewarded. I think that's probably why the movie got made when it got made. Like, if I know you mentioned the director had been trying to, had been shopping it around for years, but I think you know,
Mhm.
he kind of needed those movies that came before for some studio producer to go to actually look at it and give him the funding he needed. So, yeah, it's just like I said, like it's a great. I think the script itself is just fantastic in that it allowed for the entire cast to create these characters that felt very full and very real without feeling forced,
Yeah.
I will say that like one of the like keys to understanding how the Oscars pick who wins, both good and bad, is that people vote in their own category. Actors vote for actors, editors vote for editors, sound guys vote for sound guys,
Mm.
that stuff.
Although I think animated features is different. I think.
Picture, animated feature, and foreign film, I think, are all, and the shorts. But also,
Mm.
in order to like properly vote, if I'm gonna go in there, if I'm like an actor and I want to vote in this year, well, I've got to see Harry and Tonto, I've got to see Murder on the Orient Express, I got to see Lenny, I got to see Chinatown, I got to see Godfather Part Two. And if I'm like an actor in my 20s or 30s, I'm real fucking busy. That's a big commitment. So the people who vote most often are older, more retired actors,
Mm,
or like semi-retired. That's why you see things like what's his name, Anthony Hopkins winning a couple years ago for The Father.
mm.
When everyone, like, clearly the entire award was set up expecting, I don't know why I can't remember names tonight.
Chadwick Boseman.
Chadwick Boseman to win. We'll get there. We'll talk about it when we talk about it. It's like the funniest. That moment is still one of the funniest moments in all of Oscar history. Just having to like, oh, the wrong guy won.
Although, if you've seen The Father,
I'm not saying like the wrong guy won in like terms of performance. Like they planned on having like they clearly planned on having like a moving tribute to Chadwick Boseman, and then like, oh fuck, Anthony Hopkins won, and it's 5 a.m. there. He's like 80, so he went to bed 3 hours ago.
he went to sleep
Good night.
and he woke up.
Top tier.
I just remember that Donald Duck meme of like waking Anthony Hopkins finding out he won an Oscar, and he like wakes up in his bed and goes back to sleep. I'm sorry.
There are the last few years have had several. I don't want to say extremely. Some of them are kind of comedic, like the bit where Emma Stone is like up there giving her speech and realizing like, oh, people are gonna be real mad at me in the morning. I didn't want to win this one. Or like, and sometimes they're a little more depressing, like a couple years ago, Will Smith like actively having an emotional breakdown on stage, and it's just like, play him off, this is really uncomfortable. But the last few years have been good years for like, what the fuck is happening at those Oscars. So I want to do this podcast. So, but anyway, so that's why I think they like to give it to older actors. I think they like to give it to actors. Like, you look at the rest of the people who have a chance, like Dustin Hoffman, I think had already won by now. Jack Nicholson and Al Pacino will have chances to win again.
Mm.
Mhm.
Given Scent of a Woman, good or better chance. Jesus Christ, Scent of a Woman. We'll talk about it when we talk about it.
And Jack Nicholson, I think he would go on to win like 3 Oscars. So
He is like,
they're like,
yeah.
these are younger actors that they have a long time to win an
Yeah.
Oscar, Whereas Art Carney's older, and if he doesn't win this Oscar, he's never going to win an Oscar.
The handful of times they've let extremely famous writers, directors, or actors like die without winning something is very clearly one of those things that like gets in Academy voters' craws. Like,
Mhm.
I love Martin Scorsese is a great director. Man, he gave it to The Departed. He gave it to The Departed. It's not even the best version of that movie. I prefer Infernal Affairs. I'm sorry. So
I haven't seen it yet.
there,
It's on my
it's a
list.
good movie. It is a good movie. Martin Scorsese makes good movies. I don't think this is a controversial. I don't think this is what the kids call a hot take.
But does he like comic book movies?
He does. He is a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic
Yeah.
Universe.
Oh yeah,
Ant-Man and the Wasp is his favorite.
yeah. he really liked
Yeah.
Quantumania. I will say that this past Oscars was the third time that a Scorsese movie has gotten 10 nominations at the Oscars and won nothing.
That's still that we'll talk about it when we get there, or if we ever get there.
Sure.
But like, man,
Yeah.
just like I liked Poor Things a lot, but how do you give that to her over Lily Gladstone? Like, what are you even doing? This is the movie we're talking about. My point, I guess, was that like I think they sort of they even if audiences I'm including us don't always know everything that's going on. I think actors, especially older actors, would see what he's doing here and be like, yeah, that's a really good performance. I like it when Oscars go to. I feel like they often go to like really big, showy performances. I like it when they go to something more subtle,
Mm.
even if I understand why they don't. I do kind of wish they'd go to weirder performances, but it's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts from you two? We've been going for for a while.
I have to like I of course I went into this movie knowing like, okay, watching this because Art Carney won the best actor. I don't know. I mean, it's a fine performance. I just don't know if it beats Jack Nicholson in Chinatown or Al Pacino in The Godfather Part 2, or what else was released that year? I mean, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein.
I mean, that could have been also like I don't recall what year it was, but there was a pretty famous incident where like everyone was expecting this or that movie song from Enchanted to win Best Original Song, and then something from Once won, and the reason basically turned out to be this all they nominated like three songs from Enchanted and split the vote.
Ooh.
So
Hmm.
maybe he won not because he was like everyone's first choice, but enough people's like, yeah, that looks good, and give it to him.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more like strange Oscar wins,
Hmm.
at least in terms of like really like this movie won, you know,
Yeah, I get it.
and you know, it's a fine movie, it's a fine performance. Nothing screams Oscar worthy about it, I guess,
That's fair.
but that's just my thoughts.
My final thoughts on it. Yeah, I can agree to an extent where I'm. It is a surprise. I can kind of understand the feeling of this might be Art's only chance, so let's give it to him, or the sense of the nominees were all so strong that it split the vote, and as a result,
You know what?
Art Carney got the nod.
Hmm.
That might be exactly what happened. That like Chinatown and Godfather Part Two were so strong that they really did split the
Mm,
vote, and you know Dustin Hoffman and Lenny as
yeah.
well. It might have been the spoiler
It,
effect.
it might have been the spoiler effect. At the same time, though, I don't feel as if it was entirely undeserved. I,
Hmm.
as I've said before, I am not familiar really at all with Art Carney's body of work. So coming into this, I really only knew him as, a guy who had done comedy stuff, which I'd not seen. I was not familiar at all with any of his other movies, with the exception of, like I said, Last Action Hero, which I last saw maybe like 20 years ago or more, actually. Now that I think about it, because 20 years ago would still be in this century. Oh boy. And but in getting back to the point, I don't feel like it was like I don't feel like that it's undeserved. I think that his performance in the film is very, very strong. And while I wouldn't say it's a film that I loved, I will say that I enjoyed it as a kind of episodic road movie, very much of its time, very much examining its time and examining the people who lived in that time. It does feel very much of its period, and
Hmm.
I don't think that's a
Hmm.
bad thing. I don't think it's not bad that it's very much a period piece now at this point. I don't know if it's one of those movies that I would tell that I would like rave about and tell people, oh, you've got to see this, you've got to find some way to watch this movie. It's fantastic, but I certainly don't feel as if I don't feel as if my time was wasted. I don't feel as if I could have been doing something better. I feel that I kind of knew what I was getting more or less when I went in, and that's what I got, and I was ultimately satisfied with what I got. And I guess maybe that's damning praise, but I that's what I have to say.
There's one thing we didn't touch on. I can't believe we didn't because I thought it would be like the first thing we would talk about. The ending when Tonto
Oh,
dies.
Ugh.
Because I swear to God, I went through this whole movie being like, this cat better not
mhm.
die. And that cat went through so much. He was almost ran over. He was like passed around like between different people. He there was that one part where like Harry puts him on the ground and expects him to like whiz in the grass like a
Mm,
dog, and then the cat just like runs away because that's what cats
That's the
do.
fucking cat,
yeah.
yeah.
And I I was like we were getting towards the end of the movie, and I was like, well, just glad the cat is okay.
Let me
and,
tell you.
and then like and then it's like Harry's playing chess by the beach in Los
Mm.
Angeles, and then one of the side characters is like, Tonto doesn't look too good. Boom, next
Yeah.
scene, dead. And
Let,
I'm like,
let, let me tell you something. let me tell you something. I wanted to go into the movie blind, but knowing that it
Yeah.
starred like an old man and his old cat, like I went to the wiki page just to kind of get a brief idea because I didn't want because I was going to be sitting there and watching it and watching it with my wife, and it's like, here's what we're going to do on a Friday evening, honey. I had to make sure that this wasn't going to be a does the dog die situation where Tonto gets hit by a car or gets mauled by coyotes or something. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, so I yeah,
Or yeah.
but
When I was watching the movie, I was like, should I check doesthedogdie.com? And I was like, no,
yeah.
it's okay. I'll be
We'll
fine.
stick it out.
I will say,
Mhm.
after everything that what Kat went through, dying of old age,
Yeah.
is probably the best ending we could
It's
have
a re- it's a
gotten.
really t- it's a
But
it's a really touching scene. I gotta say, like it like you
yeah,
really like you feel really strongly in that moment, and there's this
yeah,
sense of like you like I was just kind of happy that like okay okay, I'm sad that the cat dies. I'm sad that Harry is sad that the cat is dying after all they've gone through, but I'm at least relieved that the cat is passing away somewhat peacefully, and Harry is there,
hmm
and it's
hmm
it does bring a tear to your eye. It's another one of those scenes where you
yeah,
watch it and you think, okay, I get why Carney won the Oscar because this is really, really great work. But yeah, I was right there with you. Like,
I was gonna ask
yeah.
you too. Like, I totally spaced on asking. I wanted to see if you two cried in that scene because, like, ever since I started estrogen, and I've been on estrogen for like 2 years now, but like I've had to completely recalibrate what makes me cry. I cry so much more easily. So I was kind of like curious. Like, did that scene did hit me?
mm,
Obviously, I love cats. It's a good cat. I'm glad it was like old age instead of like fucking what's the name of that book? Um,
Marley and Me.
no, it's an older book. I read Where the Red Fern
Oh,
Grows, which I read in like
oh.
middle school. I was like sixth or seventh grade, and you're reading this like boys coming of age story in Montana or some shit. And then like the second to last chapter, you got these two dogs. And the second to last chapter, one of them gets fucking eviscerated by a mountain lion, and the other one dies of grief.
Je-
You're saying, what the
Jesus Christ.
uh
Yeah.
So I did go to look to see like I was 100% positive like when I looked at the setup of the movie I'm like yeah that cat's not seeing the end credits. He does find another like I mean they say it's an identical looking it's the same cat it's played by the same cat at the end.
Yeah. It didn't make me cry as much as it made me like my jaw was dropped because I was just like, we were so close. We were so close. And you had to pull this shit on me? How fucking
they
dare
come
you?
into my
I
home
I,
where my wife sleeps, and they.
I
Did it get Katie Connor?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it really did.
Yeah, I
I mean,
figured.
it got us both, but yeah, like we're watching it and we're thinking, oh, because to get personal, we a couple of years back like we had like there was a family dog who was very old and sadly passed away of old age, and everyone loved that dog. So when we got to that scene where Tonto, who's a good cat, is old and is kind of fading away. Yeah, it hit us both pretty hard.
When I was like the thing that I always go back to with that is like when I was like 9 or 10, I had a cat when I was a kid that actually an orange tabby now that I come to think about it. Who I loved to pieces. And when I was like 9 or 10, she passed away.
Mm,
And my mom told me that like, yeah, from your perspective, you only got this like short chunk of your life with this animal. But from her perspective, she spent her entire life being cared for by you. And I don't know, that always really helped me deal with like losing an animal.
yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense.
no, I like that.
yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, I think that's a good concluding point because like I am happy that I watched this movie. I don't know if I would tell like I am hoping some point I can find like some movie that beat out a famous movie where I can say like man this is so much better than the famous movie. It's not better than The Conversation. It's not better than The Godfather Part 2, but it's worth seeing. I think it's a well-made little movie
Hmm.
is my final thought.
Yeah, I will say, I watched the movie with my friends, like Orange Cat,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually he would watch the TV like with me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he really liked this movie. So
Surprising.
two paws up from him. He wasn't in the room for the death scene. I think he walked away by then, but he did like, the early parts where it was just close-ups of the cat. I will say, it's like so much of the comedy from this that I got out of it was just like the scenes where Tonto was just like such a cat,
Mm-hmm.
like peak cat, like the scene where they come home and Harry like puts out a fresh bowl of water for him and the cat just like sniffs it and walks away. Like that's just
So cat.
you can't fake a performance like that. That was the most realistic part of the movie for me.
After I saw it, I went like digging through reviews just to like get a sense of how it's received. Because just because a movie won an Oscar doesn't mean it was either received well at the time or has aged gracefully. We'll get to Crash when we get to it.
Do we have to?
Um, yes, I already promised a friend of mine she could sit in on that one. Anyway, and oh, my brain just totally lost track of what I was saying. Oh, and one. Okay, so the review that I found that I don't remember who said it. I think it was something like the LA Times or something. If I'm wrong, audience, please don't give me too much shit. Is like this person saying like, yeah, I really like this movie, but don't go in expecting a whole lot from it. It is the definition of a good little picture.
Mm.
Yeah. Also, we never talked about the music by Bill Conti.
We didn't, and we will continue. Good
I
music.
no, I really liked
Yeah.
it.
I had
You,
this.
you know.
I had a punchline at some point in my head. During the opening scene, he sings "Boulevard of Broken Dreams" or something,
Mm.
Oh yeah, that one.
and I was like, I was trying to formulate a punchline involving it and the Green Day song. Never
Yeah.
we
quite came together.
we never talked about like the last person to pick Harry up on his way as he went to Las Vegas, the girl in show business, and
I
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
uh,
Showbiz.
I have no idea what that scene is trying to accomplish.
Oh my god, I can't believe like I like this movie that was so much about like it was just about an old man and his cat. Like there was so much talk about sex.
uh,
I guess I don't
yeah.
know, appeal to that free love '70s crowd. I guess.
I think I'm gonna go a little bit out on a limb here and say that
Mhm.
that is reasonably accurate to to the older people I've known.
Hmm.
We're gonna that they are not always super shy about talking about sex. End of sentence. End of conversation.
Harry, I'm really horny.
Yeah, that was probably the most overtly like, except for the scene with the snake oil salesman.
Mm.
That was like probably the most overtly comedic scene in the movie.
I mean, I was uncomfortable during it because I was like, "Ooh, if the genders were swapped, especially, this would be really, really
Mm.
bad."
Mm-hmm. Either of you got any creative stuff you want to plug?
Oh yeah. No, follow me on Instagram, B Harris Film.
Yep,
Yeah.
that counts.
You can follow me on you can follow me on Twitter, but you should just follow me on Blue Sky instead. It's young Mr. Duffy. That's young Mr. Duffy. I mostly retweet cool art and sometimes share work that I'm writing. So there you go.
And he has an itch.io page that he's going to say now.
Ah, yes. Third Country Press, itch.io, Third Country Press. My wife and I, we make small RPGs and game supplements and zines, and you can find it all there. And we sporadically update it. So go and check it out. The last thing we did was a one-page map for Janelle Jacquet's memorial game jam. That's set in a post-apocalyptic shopping mall. So check it out.
Having played one of his one page games, they're all quite good.
Thank you.
As always, I can be found on Football and Tuxedos at tumblr.com, with dashes between all the words, and on Twitter and Blue Sky at LSR42. My Medium page is also LSR42. I post there once every 6,000 years. And you can also find at iwanttoreview.blogspot.com my blog where I reviewed every single episode of The X-Files and The Lone Gunman. It took me 7 years.
And next time, we will be moving even further forward in history than we did last time. We'll be talking about the 2018 film Vice, which won Best Makeup and Hairstyling at the 91st, is it 91st? Yes, 91st Academy Awards, as well as being nominated for an absolute truckload of other shit. And we'll see what I think about that movie then. Thank you both for coming out.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.